Okay, here I'm building a bar stool. This is really just a build for fun and just to try to use up some scraps to play around with the design I want to use when building the bar stools for our kitchen. So I might not be using all of the same techniques when I actually do the build, but this is kind of just a piece together, see what it looks like, see how comfortable it is, just for fun. So here I'm making a little, I don't know if you call it a jig, but it's basically just like a little 45-degree notch. That way when I'm cutting the pitch on all of my legs or the angle at which they're kind of sitting underneath, this will let me cut that angle without having to move the saw around a bunch. So this is what I'll be using for all the legs. So here I am cutting, I've got some 1.5 inch square material here that I am using to build the legs out of. So I'm cutting these legs about 1 inch longer than they're actually going to be. That way I can cut the angle or the pitch on them that I was talking about earlier once I get it in that little jig that I made. So I'm just kind of cutting these down to size after I ripped that 2x4 in half and then shaved off a little extra. That way this material is perfectly 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. So here I'm just running the legs through like I mentioned before, making sure that they are 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, just so when I make all my cuts and all my measurements, I know that everything is laying straight where I want it. This one was the only one I think I forgot to shave a little bit off of, and the rest were ready to go. So after this, we'll get them in the jig and start cutting the pitch on the legs. So here's this jig I was talking about. It's got that 45-degree notch in it. So in order to get these legs pitched, I think I'm doing like a 6-degree angle or something. That's what I decided on. I don't know why, just because when I cut it, it seemed to look the best. So I'm cutting a 6-degree angle on this one side, and then I will set up a stop and I'll cut the same angle on the other, but just kind of almost opposing. That way these will sit flat on the ground, and then there will be a level flat surface for the top or the seat to sit on top of these legs, and everything will match up just the way that I want it. So here's the stop I'm talking about. I'm getting these things in here. On the left side, the long part of the angle will be facing up, and on the right side, as I'm cutting, the long part of the angle will be down. That way when these things are resting on the floor and the bottom of the seat, everything will be nice and level. So this little piece of oak that I found is going to be perfect. I'm only having to cut just a tiny bit off of it. I'm just squaring up this one side, and then I'll have to shave the other side off a bit, but it's pretty much exactly the size that I'm going for. These bar stools I'm trying to keep pretty narrow, I guess, or to where they're not sticking out into space too much. So this will be a great piece to see what that size will feel like as far as comfort, and also what it looks like when the stool is all done. So here I'm just marking how far I want these legs to start from the edge of this seat or the top. That way I've got something to line up when I am trying to figure out the lengths for my support pieces that go in between the legs. So just getting a couple measurements here just to have a reference for where I need to set the legs. So this is what I'm going to be using for the supports to go in between the legs. It's like 4.25 inches thick. I don't think that I'll be going this wide when I actually make the stool, but this is what I had, and I didn't really feel like, ripping it down, just trying to get an idea of where I want the heights of these things to be so it's comfortable to set your feet on, all of that. But yeah, ripping this stuff down to, like I did before, kind of the length that I want. So just give me enough to take off a little angle and get all these pieces cut to size. So here I'm kind of situating this thing around, trying to figure out where these top support pieces are going to rest as far as like how far away from the top of the stool. And then once I get that figured out, the bottom support pieces are more like a comfort thing, like where your feet are going to be able to rest. I feel like that's important because you can't just put them where they're most structurally sound. because depending on the height of your bench, that doesn't always make sense for what's comfortable. So I can't remember what I ended up going with, but you'll kind of see in the finished picture what it looks like, and you can kind of copy. I think I've got like a 40-inch bar that I'm making these stools for. As always, using the Craig pocket hole. I don't know if I'll use this for when I actually make the stools, but I totally could. These drill outs will be, I guess, visible if you're looking, at the inside of the bench, but I can always cover them with the little wood fillers that they have, and it might end up looking pretty nice. So I might use the same technique, or I might cut out a little notch and slide it into the leg. I don't know. We'll see what happens when I get there, but this thing is awesome for all sorts of projects, and I'm always using this thing. So I've decided here where my supports are going to go as far as height. I am using some 1/4-inch plywood scraps just for spacers. That way these supports don't sit flush with the outside of the legs, but they're inset just a little bit. I feel like it makes it look a little bit better, and it also gives more material for these screws from the pocket holes coming in at an angle, so it doesn't bust out the other side or crack the edge of this material because it is so thin. So I got a 1/4-inch setting in from the outside face of the legs. So once I got these two sides fastened together with the top supports, I used the stool top to get an idea of the length that I need for these longer supports. After I got that length, I cut the same 6-degree angle that's going all the way around this stool, and I'll get these fastened in at the same height, and then I can get the top on and it'll start to look a little bit more like a stool. Also making sure here to use that same 1/4-inch plywood. That way I've got these supports set from the outside of the legs in 1/4 of an inch. Same thing, it's for structure, and it also, I feel like, looks just a little bit better than having it flush with the outside. Okay, here it is. Got the top supports on, and this thing is looking pretty slick, so on to the bottom. All right, so here it is with the bottom supports on as well. The way that I'm going to fasten this thing is I'm just going to take screws through the top. I'll do the countersink bit, and then I'll just cover it with wood fill later. I don't know if there's a better way to do this for my finished product or not, but that's what I'm going to be doing. So where the bottom supports ended up, it's pretty far, pretty close to the bottom. This is not super comfortable, so I think I did end up moving them maybe 3 or 4 inches higher. But this is kind of the overall look of the stool, and I think it looks pretty cool. So here it is sitting in place. This bar is 40 inches tall. I just took a foot off of that for the top measurement of the stool, and it seemed to be pretty comfortable. So pretty happy with how the design looks as far as shape. So I'm probably going to mimic something pretty close to this. Might make it a little bit more narrow, but hope you enjoyed this build. It was super fun. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.